Oh, the irony. Here I was, Zareth Grimscale, Senior Containment Specialist for the Galactic Wildlife Preservation Society, thinking this assignment would be the easiest credits I had ever earned. One tiny predator cub, how hard could it be? Keep it alive, keep it fed, collect my payment. I had wrestled acid-spitting Venox serpents into submission, negotiated treaties with telepathic void whales, and once spent 6 months babysitting a colony of explosive gas beetles without losing a single antenna. A Razorclaw cub should have been simpler than explaining quantum mechanics to a houseplant. Should have been. Those are the two most dangerous words in any language. The facility on Outpost Kepler 9 was standard issue. White walls, sterile air recyclers, and enough containment protocols to make a paranoid android weep with joy. The kind of place where they keep things that could potentially end civilizations if they got loose. The specimen arrived 3 days ago, Director Vex announced as we walked through the corridors. The old Thraxian bureaucrat had the personality of wet concrete and the charm to match. Multiple species have attempted feeding protocols. All have failed. Failed. What a wonderfully vague way to describe whatever fresh nightmare awaited me. We stopped outside Containment Cell 7, and I got my first look at our problem child through the reinforced viewing panel. The Razorclaw cub was about the size of a medium transport pod, covered in midnight blue scales that shimmered with an almost metallic sheen. Its 6 legs ended in claws that could probably slice through titanium like warm butter, and it looked absolutely miserable. "How long has it been refusing food?" I asked, studying the creature's posture. Everything about its body language screamed distress. 72 hours, Director Vex replied with characteristic empathy, which is to say, none at all. Previous feeders included Korthak nutritionists, Zephyrian animal handlers, and even a crystalline empath. The cub rejected all offerings. Crystalline empath. They could literally feel what another creature needed, and this cub still said no thank you to their cuisine suggestions. Either it was incredibly picky, or something else was going on. "What about the mother?" I asked. "Deceased. Poachers killed her for her scales 3 weeks ago. The cub was found hiding in her den, nearly starved." Ah, there it was. Trauma. The universal constant that made every job 10 times more complicated than it needed to be. I entered the containment cell slowly, keeping my movements calm and non-threatening. The cub's head snapped up immediately, its silver eyes tracking my every move. Those eyes held intelligence, pain, and a wariness that made my secondary heart skip a beat. "Hello there, little one," I said softly, activating my translator to Razorclaw dialect. "I am Zareth. I am here to help." The cub made a sound somewhere between a growl and a whimper. Not exactly a warm welcome, but not an immediate attack either. Progress. I knelt down and placed a container of premium Korthak meat strips on the floor between us. The good stuff, imported from the core worlds at ridiculous expense. Most carnivores would leap at the chance to eat something so luxurious. The cub looked at the food, looked at me, and very deliberately turned its back. "Not interested in the 5-star dining experience?" I asked. "Fair enough. You have standards." I tried 7 different types of meat over the next 2 hours. Synthetic proteins, live prey analogs, even some exotic delicacies from the outer rim. The cub's response was consistent. Sniff, consider, reject. By the time I left the cell, I was starting to understand why everyone else had given up. This was not just pickiness. This was a complete psychological shutdown. "Any luck?" Director Vex asked as I emerged from the containment area. "The cub is not just refusing food," I explained. "It is refusing connection. Every offering we make represents a relationship it is not ready to form." "Spare me the psychology lecture," Vex snapped. "Can you fix it or not? Fix it." Like the cub was a broken machine instead of a traumatized child. I was beginning to understand why this place had such high staff turnover. "Give me time," I said, "and maybe consider bringing in someone with a different approach." That night, I reviewed the facility's personnel files in my quarters. Standard mix of scientists, handlers, and support staff. All qualified, all professional, all completely missing the point. Except for one file that caught my attention. Rachel Morrison, human. Kitchen staff. Age 27. Previous experience, Baker on New Terra Colony, volunteer at interspecies orphanage on Station Harmony. A baker. With orphanage experience, working in a high-security research facility. Humans had a reputation in certain circles. They bonded with anything that moved, showed empathy to creatures that wanted to eat them, and generally behaved like the universe's most optimistic idiots. Maybe that was exactly what we needed. I found Rachel the next morning in the facility's main kitchen, preparing meals for the research staff. She was smaller than I expected, with brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and flour dusting her apron. She looked up when I entered, offering a smile that somehow managed to be both professional and genuinely warm. "You must be the new containment specialist," she said, her accent carrying traces of the colony worlds. "Rachel Morrison. I handle food services for the facility." "Zareth Grimscale," I replied. "I need to ask you about the Razorclaw cub." Her expression immediately grew serious. "Poor little thing. I have been watching the feeding attempts through the security feeds. Breaks my heart. Breaks her heart." When was the last time I had heard someone at this facility express actual emotion about a specimen? "What do you make of the rejections?" I asked. Rachel wiped her hands, on her apron, considering the question. "Well, I am not an expert on alien psychology, but if I had to guess, I would say the cub is not just hungry for food. It is hungry for connection, for trust. Every meal should be a social experience, especially for young creatures. Social experience. Every feeding expert we had tried focused on nutrition, palatability, presentation. None of them considered the emotional context of eating." "Would you be willing to try feeding the cub?" I asked. "Me?" Rachel laughed, a sound that somehow made the sterile kitchen feel warmer. "I am just a baker. I make bread and stew, not exotic alien cuisine. Maybe that is exactly what we need." An hour later, I watched through the observation panel as Rachel entered containment cell 7 carrying a simple wooden tray. No fancy serving dishes, no exotic delicacies, just a chunk of fresh-baked bread, still warm from the oven, and a small cup of water. The cub noticed her immediately, but its reaction was different from previous encounters. Instead of wariness or aggression, it seemed curious. Rachel sat down cross-legged on the floor, placed the tray beside her, and simply waited. She did not try to coax the cub closer, did not make encouraging noises, did not do anything except exist peacefully in the same space. "What is she doing?" Director Vex asked, having arrived to observe the attempt. "Giving the cub time to make its own choices," I replied. After several minutes, Rachel tore off a piece of bread and began eating it herself. The simple act seemed to fascinate the cub, which crept closer to get a better view. "She is not even offering it food," Vex complained. "She is demonstrating that the food is safe," I corrected, "and that eating can be a shared, social experience." Rachel continued eating, occasionally making soft humming sounds that seemed to relax the cub further. When she was halfway through her piece of bread, she placed the remainder on the tray and pushed it gently toward the center of the space. Not toward the cub, just into neutral territory. The cub watched this gesture with intense concentration. Here was food, freely offered, with no pressure to accept and no consequences for refusal. Slowly, almost cautiously, the cub approached the tray. "It is actually considering the food," Vex whispered, amazement creeping into his voice. The cub sniffed the bread carefully, then looked at Rachel. She smiled and nodded encouragingly, but made no move to interfere. The cub took a tiny bite, then another. Then it settled down next to the tray and began eating in earnest, making small, contented sounds between bites. "Remarkable," I breathed. "How did she know?" Through the intercom, Rachel's voice was soft and warm. "Back on Station Harmony, we had a lot of traumatized children from different species. The first rule was always the same. Meet them where they are, not where you think they should be." The cub finished the bread and looked hopefully at Rachel. She smiled and tore off another piece from a second loaf she had brought, offering it directly. This time the cub took it from her hand. "The psychological barriers are breaking down," I observed. She has established trust through patience and non-threatening behavior. And bread, Vex added dryly. Apparently, the solution to our 72-hour crisis was carbohydrates. Over the next hour, Rachel continued the feeding session, alternating between feeding herself and offering food to the cub. She talked to it constantly, describing her actions, commenting on the weather, sharing stories about her experiences on different worlds. The cub listened to everything, its silver eyes focused on her face with rapt attention. It is learning her voice patterns, I realized, forming an attachment based on consistent, gentle interaction. When the session ended, the cub actually whined softly as Rachel prepared to leave. She patted its massive head gently, promised to return soon, and exited the cell with a satisfied smile. "Well?" I asked, as she rejoined us in the observation area. "Hungry little thing," she said simply. But not just for food. It needed someone to care about it as an individual, not as a specimen. Director Vex was staring at her like she had just performed miraculous surgery with kitchen utensils. "You accomplished in 1 hour what our best experts could not manage in 3 days." Rachel shrugged. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. The cub was not being difficult, it was being careful. Careful. Trust a human to see caution as wisdom instead of stubbornness. "Would you be willing to continue feeding the cub?" I asked. "At least until we can establish a permanent care routine?" "Of course," Rachel replied. "Though I should warn you, I will probably spoil it terribly. I have a weakness for feeding anyone who looks hungry." As we watched through the panel, the cub had curled up in the exact spot where Rachel had been sitting, as if trying to preserve some trace of her presence. "The attachment is already forming," I observed. "This could complicate the eventual relocation process." "Or make it easier," Rachel suggested. "A cub that trusts one human might be more willing to trust others. Emotional stability tends to breed confidence." Emotional stability. Trust. Confidence. Concepts that rarely appeared in standard containment protocols, but apparently essential for this particular situation. "I have a feeling," I said, "that this assignment just became significantly more complicated." "Or more interesting," Rachel added with that warm smile of hers. Through the observation panel, the Razorclaw cub opened one silver eye and looked directly at us, as if it knew we were discussing its future. For the first time since arriving at the facility, it did not look afraid. That evening, I updated my progress report with a mixture of professional satisfaction and growing concern. The immediate crisis was resolved, yes, but we had created a new set of challenges. The cub had bonded with Rachel Morrison in a way that suggested deep psychological attachment. Separating them now would likely cause significant trauma, potentially undoing all our progress. On the other hand, keeping them together raised questions about protocol, procedure, and the long-term viability of using kitchen staff as specialized animal handlers. I was beginning to suspect that this simple assignment was about to become anything but simple. The next morning brought news that confirmed my worst suspicions. "Transport ship arrives tomorrow," Director Vex announced during our briefing. "The cub will be transferred to the research facility on Nexus Prime for advanced behavioral studies." Advanced behavioral studies. A polite way of saying they wanted to examine every aspect of the cub's psychology, probably to better understand how to control adult Razorclaws. "What about the attachment bond?" I asked. "Not our concern," Vex replied coldly. "Our job is specimen preservation and transfer. Emotional considerations are outside our mandate." Outside our mandate. Right. Because traumatizing a young creature was perfectly acceptable as long as the proper forms were filed. I found Rachel in the kitchen again, preparing what would likely be her final meal for the cub. She looked up as I entered, and I could see she already knew about the transfer. "How long do we have?" she asked simply. 24 hours. She nodded, her expression thoughtful rather than upset. "Then we better make them count." That afternoon, I watched as Rachel spent an extended session with the cub, teaching it simple commands, sharing stories, and generally behaving like a devoted caregiver rather than temporary facility staff. The cub responded with obvious affection, nuzzling her hand, following her around the cell, and making soft chirping sounds whenever she spoke. "They are genuinely attached," I reported to Vex. "Separation will cause significant psychological distress." "Document the distress for the research team," he replied. "They will find it useful for their studies." Document the distress. Use a traumatized child's pain as research data. I was beginning to understand why humans had such a reputation for unpredictable behavior. If I had to choose between following protocol and preventing unnecessary suffering, I was starting to lean toward the human approach, which was probably going to get me in serious trouble. The transport ship arrived exactly on schedule the next morning, along with a team of researchers from Nexus Prime who treated the cub like a valuable but inanimate cargo shipment. "Magnificent specimen," the lead researcher, Dr. Corvin, observed as he reviewed the containment protocols. "The behavioral data should provide excellent insights into Razorclaw psychology." Behavioral data. Insights. Everything except acknowledgement that we were discussing a living creature with feelings and needs. Rachel was conspicuously absent from the transfer preparations. I found her in her quarters, sitting quietly and staring out the viewport at the stars. "Not coming to say goodbye?" I asked. "I said goodbye yesterday," she replied softly. "No point in making it harder for both of us." I could hear the pain in her voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. In just a few days, she had formed a genuine emotional bond with the cub, and now she was losing it to bureaucratic necessity. "For what it is worth," I said, "you saved its life. Without your intervention, it would have starved. And now it goes to a research facility where they will study its trauma responses," she replied. "Not sure that counts as saving." Before I could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed everything in harsh red, and the intercom crackled with urgent announcements. "Containment breach in Sector 7. All personnel evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Sector 7. The cub's cell." Rachel and I ran through the corridors toward the containment area, arriving just as security teams were setting up a perimeter. Through the observation panel, we could see the cub in a state of complete panic, throwing itself against the walls and making distressed howling sounds. "What happened?" I demanded. "The researchers tried to sedate it for transport," a security officer explained. "It reacted badly." Badly was an understatement. The cub had apparently gone berserk when the sedation team entered its cell, destroying half the containment equipment and injuring 2 researchers in the process. "It is terrified," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "Look at it. It thinks we are abandoning it." She was right. The cub's behavior was not aggression. It was pure, desperate fear. "We need to tranquilize it from a distance, Doctor," Corvin announced, pulling out a heavy-duty sedation rifle. "Full dose should put it under for several hours." "Wait," I said. "Let me try something first." Before anyone could stop me, I activated the intercom to the containment cell. "Rachel, can the cub hear your voice through the speakers?" She nodded and leaned toward the microphone. "Hey there, little one," she said softly. "It is okay. I am here." The cub's howling stopped immediately. It looked around frantically, searching for the source of her voice. "I know you are scared," Rachel continued, her voice gentle and reassuring. "But you are going to be all right. I promise." The cub pressed itself against the wall nearest to the observation panel, as if trying to get closer to her voice. "This is highly irregular, Doctor," Corvin protested. "We need to maintain control of the situation." "Your control caused the situation," I replied sharply. "Let her try." Rachel continued talking to the cub, explaining what was happening, promising that the scary people were not going to hurt it, and generally providing the kind of emotional support that apparently no one else had thought to offer. Gradually, the cub began to calm down. "Remarkable, Doctor," Corvin admitted grudgingly. "The creature responds to her voice with measurable physiological changes. Reduced stress hormones, lower heart rate, stabilized brain chemistry." "Because she cares about it as an individual," I said, "not as a research subject." The cub was now sitting quietly, listening to Rachel's voice with obvious comfort. But I could see the problem we were going to face as soon as she stopped talking. Dr. Corvin, I said, I have a proposal. What exactly are you proposing? Dr. Corvin asked, his tone suggesting I was about to waste everyone's valuable time. Rachel comes with us to Nexus Prime, I said. Temporary assignment as behavioral specialist for this specific case. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a plasma torch and served it for dinner. Director Vex looked like I had suggested we all strip naked and dance the Centaurian mambo. Absolutely not, Vex snapped. She is kitchen staff, not a qualified researcher. She is the only person who can keep that cub stable, I countered. Without her, you will have a completely traumatized specimen that provides no useful data whatsoever. Dr. Corvin was studying the containment cell where the cub continued to press against the wall, listening to Rachel's soothing voice through the intercom. Even I could see the wheels turning in his calculating mind. The creature's stress responses have normalized completely under her influence, he admitted slowly. From a research perspective, maintaining this stabilizing factor could prove invaluable. She is not a research tool, Rachel said firmly, finally looking up from the microphone. If I go to Nexus Prime, it will be to ensure proper care for that cub, not to participate in whatever experiments you have planned. Oh, brilliant. Tell the lead researcher exactly what you will not do for him. That always worked out perfectly. Miss Morrison, Dr. Corvin said with the kind of smile that probably made small children hide under their beds, I think you misunderstand the nature of our work. We study behavioral patterns to better understand these magnificent creatures. And what happens to the cub after your studies are complete? She asked. More silence. The kind that answered her question without anyone needing to say the words. The specimen will be evaluated for various research applications, Dr. Corvin said carefully. Evaluated. Research applications. Beautiful euphemisms for dissection and vivisection. Then I definitely will not be helping you, Rachel stated flatly. The cub chose that moment to let out a soft, plaintive cry that somehow managed to sound like both a question and a plea. Rachel's resolve visibly wavered as she looked through the observation panel. However, she added after a long pause, if there were guarantees about the cub's welfare, written guarantees signed by facility administrators, then perhaps we could discuss alternative arrangements. Dr. Corvin's expression shifted from frustrated to intrigued. What sort of guarantees? No invasive procedures. No separation from familiar caregivers without medical necessity. No experimental treatments that cause deliberate distress. And after your behavioral studies are complete, the cub goes to a proper wildlife sanctuary, not another research facility. I had to admire her negotiating strategy. Start with an absolute refusal, then offer conditions that sounded reasonable but would probably give the research team nightmares. Those terms are highly unusual, Dr. Corvin said. So is having a Razorclaw cub that trusts humanoids, Rachel replied. Seems like a fair trade. The next few hours involved enough bureaucratic wrangling to make a Vogon poetry recital seem entertaining by comparison. Forms were filled out, protocols were adjusted, emergency authorizations were requested from 3 different departments, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Rachel Morrison officially became the galaxy's first licensed xenobiological behavioral consultant with a specialization in traumatized predator cubs. The title alone probably cost the research budget more credits than my entire annual salary. This is madness, Director Vex muttered as we watched the final paperwork being processed. Kitchen staff conducting scientific research. She is not conducting research, I corrected. She is providing essential support services for an ongoing study. Completely different thing. Is it? According to Regulation 774 Alpha, subsection 12, paragraph 93, yes, absolutely. I had no idea if Regulation 774 Alpha actually existed, but Vex was not about to admit he did not know either. The transport to Nexus Prime went more smoothly than anyone expected. Rachel spent most of the journey in the specially modified cargo hold with the cub, which had been outfitted with comfortable bedding, proper ventilation, and a small food preparation area. It is like watching interspecies daycare, I observed to Dr. Corvin as we monitored the area through security feeds. Rachel was reading to the cub from what appeared to be a human children's book, complete with colorful illustrations and simple rhyming text. The cub listened with rapt attention, occasionally making soft chirping sounds when she turned the pages. Fascinating, Doctor, Corvin murmured. The creature is displaying advanced pattern recognition and anticipatory behavior. It appears to understand narrative structure. Or it just likes the sound of her voice, I suggested. No, look at the neurological readings. Brain activity spikes occur specifically at narrative tension points and resolution moments. The creature is following the story structure. Sure enough, the monitoring equipment showed clear patterns of engagement that corresponded with dramatic moments in whatever tale Rachel was sharing. A Razorclaw cub with literary appreciation, I said. The universe becomes stranger every day. Not literary appreciation, Dr. Corvin corrected. Emotional intelligence. The creature is reading Rachel's vocal patterns and responding to the emotional content of her storytelling. Emotional intelligence. In a species universally feared for their mindless savagery. The implications were staggering. Nexus Prime was exactly what you would expect from a premier research facility. Gleaming laboratories, advanced equipment, and the kind of sterile efficiency that made you feel like a bacteria sample just waiting to be cultured. The cub's new habitat was impressive, I had to admit. A spacious enclosure with multiple environmental zones, climbing structures, and even a small stream with actual fish swimming in it. Very nice, Rachel said as she inspected the space. But where's the kitchen access? Kitchen access? Dr. Corvin looked confused. How am I supposed to prepare meals for the cub if I cannot access proper cooking facilities? The facility has automated feeding systems. Precisely calibrated nutritional delivery at optimal intervals. Rachel gave him a look that could have frozen liquid nitrogen. Dr. Corvin, would you like to explain to the cub that it will no longer be receiving home-cooked meals shared with someone who cares about it, but instead will be eating from a machine that dispenses scientifically formulated pellets? The nutritional content is superior to any manually prepared. The nutritional content is irrelevant if the cub stops eating again, she interrupted. Feeding is a social activity. Remove the social element, and you remove the motivation to eat. More forms, more authorizations, more bureaucratic gymnastics that would have impressed a team of professional accountants. By the end of the first week, Rachel had somehow managed to get herself assigned a small kitchen adjacent to the cub's habitat, complete with basic cooking equipment and access to a variety of ingredients. How does she do it? I asked Dr. Corvin as we watched her preparing what appeared to be some kind of meat and vegetable stew. I have no idea, he admitted. Every time I try to say no to one of her requests, she explains why it is essential for the cub's psychological well-being. And suddenly, I find myself approving things I never intended to approve. She is using your own scientific curiosity against you, I realized. Every suggestion she makes comes with potential research benefits. Diabolical, he muttered, but there was a grudging respect in his voice. The research data they were collecting was unprecedented. Razorclaws in the wild were solitary, aggressive, and nearly impossible to observe safely. But Rachel's cub displayed complex social behaviors, problem-solving abilities, and emotional responses that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about the species. It is learning language, Doctor, Corvin announced during our weekly briefing. Not just responding to commands, but actually acquiring vocabulary. Rachel has taught it over 40 distinct human words, and it uses them appropriately in context. A talking Razorclaw, I said. That will not cause any panic whatsoever. The implications for interspecies communication research alone are terrifying, I finished. If one cub can learn human language, what stops an entire pack from coordinating complex strategies using borrowed vocabulary? Dr. Corvin paused, apparently not having considered the military applications of his research. We would need to implement additional security protocols. Additional security protocols. Because the current ones were working so well. The real breakthrough came during the third week, when Rachel introduced the cub to other facility personnel, not researchers or guards, but maintenance workers, cafeteria staff, and administrative personnel who had no agenda beyond doing their jobs. Watch this, Rachel said as a janitor named Pete entered the habitat to clean the water filtration system. The cub, now significantly larger and more confident, approached Pete with curious interest rather than fear or aggression. It sniffed his equipment, chirped softly when he spoke to it, and even allowed him to pet its head scales. Remarkable, Doctor. Corvin breathed. No fear response. No territorial behavior. No predatory instincts. Because Pete is not afraid of it, Rachel explained. Fear breeds fear. Calm confidence breeds calm confidence. You are suggesting that Razorclaw aggression is primarily defensive? I am suggesting that maybe we have been approaching these creatures with the wrong assumptions for centuries. Over the following days, they introduced the cub to more facility staff. Each interaction was carefully monitored, but the pattern remained consistent. As long as humans approached with calm, non-threatening behavior, the cub responded with curiosity and friendliness. It is treating humans as pack members, I observed during one session, where the cub was playing with 3 different maintenance workers simultaneously. Extended family, Rachel corrected. It sees humans as part of its social structure, but not as immediate pack. More like trusted allies. Trusted allies. A Razorclaw cub that considered humans to be friendly neighbors instead of potential prey or threats. Dr. Corvin, I said, you do realize what this means for your research conclusions? That everything we thought we knew about Razorclaw behavior was based on interactions with wild, frightened, or defensive individuals, he replied slowly. This cub is displaying the natural social behavior of the species when not under stress, which means adult Razorclaws might be capable of similar socialization under the right circumstances. The implications are staggering, he whispered. Staggering was putting it mildly. If Razorclaws could form positive relationships with other species, it would revolutionize everything from wildlife management to interplanetary security protocols. But it also raised uncomfortable questions about all the Razorclaws that had been killed as dangerous predators over the centuries. Rachel, I asked during one of our private conversations, what happens when the cub reaches maturity? Adult Razorclaws are significantly more dangerous than cubs. Dangerous to whom? She replied. The cub trusts humans because it has learned that humans can be trustworthy. Why would that change as it grows older? Because adult instincts might override learned behavior. Or learned behavior might modify adult instincts. We will not know until it happens. The question of long-term care was becoming increasingly urgent. The cub was growing rapidly, already approaching the size where its claws and teeth could cause serious injury even during play. The wildlife sanctuary option is looking less viable, Dr. Corvin admitted. No existing facility is equipped to handle a socialized Razorclaw. So, what are our alternatives? I asked. Extended observation here at Nexus Prime, or we find somewhere the cub can live as naturally as possible while maintaining the social bonds it has formed, Rachel interrupted. Such as? New Terra Colony has been looking for unique approaches to wildlife conservation. They might be interested in hosting the first interspecies Razorclaw integration program. Trust Rachel to make cohabitation with an apex predator sound like a community outreach initiative. The colonial administration would never approve such a risk, I said. They might, if the risk came with significant research grants and the promise of breakthrough discoveries in interspecies cooperation. More bureaucracy, more forms, more impossible negotiations that somehow became possible when Rachel was involved. 3 months later, I found myself standing in the cargo bay of a transport ship bound for New Terra Colony, watching Rachel pack supplies for the most unusual relocation in galactic history. The cub, now the size of a small hover car and sporting impressively sharp adult dentition, was calmly helping her organize its belongings. It had learned to carry its own food bowls, sort its toys by size, and even fold its blankets with minimal assistance. Ready for the next adventure? Rachel asked it, scratching behind its ear ridges. The cub chirped happily and nuzzled her shoulder with enough force to knock over a normal person. Rachel just laughed and steadied herself against its massive head. Think it will work out? I asked. Ask me in 10 years, she replied. Right now, I am just focused on making sure our friend here has the best possible chance at a happy life. Our friend. Not the specimen, not the research subject, not the potentially dangerous predator. Just a friend who happened to be a Razorclaw. As the transport prepared for departure, I reflected on everything that had happened since that first day when a traumatized cub refused to eat. Rachel Morrison, armed with nothing more than fresh bread and an inexhaustible supply of patience, had accomplished something that decades of scientific research had failed to achieve. She had proven that the most feared predators in the galaxy were capable of love. And somehow, that seemed like the most important discovery of all.